editor and compiler of The Secret Loves of Geek Girls, the original publisher, and one of the contributing writers.
I'm Megan Levy-Heaton. I was the book designer on the original Kickstarter version of Secret Loves, and I also contributed an essay about how I met my husband through my fan fiction.
I'm Teenie Howard. I'm one of the contributors to Secret Loves of Geek Girls.
Hi, I'm Fiona Adams. I wrote the short story Pop Culture Metaphor, which was illustrated by Jen Vaughn and illustrated in Secret Loves of Geek Girls.
My name is Megan Carter. I did one of the comics in The Secret Loves. It's called Mechanism.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Kress. I am a contributor to Secret Loves of Geek Girls, and my essay is I'm Your Biggest Fan.
Hi, I'm Kristen Gudsnuck, and I provided several illustrations to go with some of the prose stories that are in Secret Loves of Geek Girls.
So the book is a collection of stories about sex, dating, and love from girls who identify as geek girls. Pretty much every single thing you could think about in the realm of romance and dating. So it's people who are in poly relationships, people who are in long-distance relationships, people who are identify as queer, people who have fallen into love late in their life, people who don't know if they ever will. It's a lot of different stories about short romances that only lasted a few months, and stories about marriage that's lasted years. And so it was really important for us to have a wide variety of stories to be told so that everyone could feel like they related to something.
I wrote a story called Fanfiction Female Angst, which is kind of a play on the way that fanfiction is often tagged for people that are looking for fanfiction. And it's the story of myself and my first serious relationship was the woman. Well, we were young girls, then we weren't really women, then we were like teenagers, and how our relationship was sort of informed by the fact that we wrote a lot of fan fiction together, which can often be very over dramatic and intense, and it kind of led to us having a really strange and over dramatic relationship because our attraction got tangled up with all these ridiculously overwrought emotional stories we were writing.
It was kind of a combination of how I met my husband and how attitudes towards people who meet people who develop relationships in fandom have changed over the years. My husband was a big fan of my Lena Gari fan fiction and the anime Slayers, but when I told people how I met him, because I'm a journalist in real life, they assumed I met him through the newspaper, and I just kind of lied and went, yeah, I totally did that. And because, especially when I first met him, to acknowledge at work, especially if you were in fandom or did anything like write fan fiction, you were kind of ostracized and you weren't taken seriously at all. So you had to hide that part of yourself. And as part of it, I had to hide how I really met my husband.
Mechanism is a story about a self-defense mechanism that I struggled with to do with self-esteem and dating and protecting yourself from being hurt from rejection, and how that affected ultimately actually really liking someone and finding out they liked me and being really confused about that.
I illustrated Hope Nicholson's story, which was, she's also the editor, and it was called Rise of the Late Bloomer. Her story was really cool. It's it's about like losing your virginity, which is, it's a good story because, I think other people have brought this up, but it sort of destigmatizes talking about like women's sexuality and talking about women's sexuality in a way that's not intended to be like titillating, but instead is just like exploratory. And
the story at this point is actually kind of outdated because it was about how like my ideal situation is, so I'm poly and trans and queer and a whole bunch of other stuff that we don't have time to get into, but like my dream is to live with my partners and just be able to spend time with them, just like hanging out and like eating together and just spending time together day in and day out, which is gonna happen this winter. So it's kind of an outdated story at this point because it's no longer a wish.
My essay in the book is about me, of course, and it's about how sometimes we as geek girls, or just I think geeks in general, we approach our love lives a little bit the way we approach our fiction, in that we kind of geek out about it. So it's about placing people who we've crushes on that pedestal, sort of becoming their fan to the point where these people can never live up to our expectations. And so it's both something that prevents us from getting to relationships, but it's also something that sort of helps us never being hurt, because if we don't get into the relationships in the first place, then we don't have to deal with the messiness of life. So we have to work on that and not be like that. And it's something I personally worked on very hard for quite a long time.
I think it's really important that this book is out there to make sure that people feel comfortable and feel less isolated if they are a geek girl, because a lot of us have questions about love and dating, but we're scared to ask because we don't know how to bring our own perspectives into kind of a general conversation. Like, no one covers geek girls in really media in terms of love and dating. You don't see articles about us in YM and 17, but we do talk to each other, and these stories are giving people a chance to talk to each other that they might not have in their own communities. So all of us have different perspectives on dating and love and sex, and by talking to each other we can kind of figure it out together, I think. And so if you think that something's really weird and that you're the only one who feels that way, maybe one of these stories will either resonate with you and be your experience, or at least you'll see so many weirdos telling about their stories on page that you know that your story can't be possibly as strange as theirs.
I think this book is really empowering because it's teaching a lot of people, I think especially teenage girls and young college-aged women, that they don't have to sacrifice who they really are or in order to not only just love other people but love themselves. You know, it kind of it deviates from that negative stereotype that geek girls and nerd girls have always had in literature, where, you know, if you were any sort of geek or any sort of nerd, you were not destined to find any sort of love. You were just always meant to be the butt of the joke. Instead, these stories are really empowering, and not just about relationships between men and women, but also gender identity and just learning to love yourself in general. And I think that's what all these stories have in common.
A book like Secret Loves of Geek Girls, I think, would have been invaluable to me growing up. I spent a lot of time on the internet, like kind of when the internet was still like a real big Wild West thing. To me, it felt like I was the only person that knew about this stuff in my real world. And then to now be, you know, here at New York Comic Con hanging out and doing press with a bunch of women who did the same things and grew up doing the same things is a really unique experience. And I think it's cool that not only do I get to experience this with the other women who are part of the book, but I get to experience it with the other people who read the book and are fans of the book. I think it's a really universal thing, being a weird, lonely, nerdy girl and trying to find each other. There's a universal search that I think everyone can relate to, especially nerds. We're nerds the same way as any guy is, so.
Like, we're at this point where, like, we still want good representation, but that good representation is just so incredibly rare. So being able to contribute towards that it's like a little scary, but also like a huge honor.
It's been a really interesting process writing this essay for Secret Loves, because I'm actually a fiction writer. And so writing about myself and writing nonfiction is completely new territory. And knowing that friends and family and people who've read my fiction will also be reading this, it's actually a very vulnerable thing to do. But for myself, and I think for probably all the contributors, it was such a worthwhile thing to do that our own vulnerability was not only a necessary evil, it was actually quite important to do it. So yeah, it's a little scary, but I'm really glad I did, and I'm so grateful to the other contributors who did, because I'm also a fan of the book. So I wrote one essay, but there's like over 50 contributors in it.
Self-esteem in terms of this book, I think, is super important, and I think a huge issue that comes up a lot in the book. It's a repeating theme of struggling with feeling outcasted or weird and not thinking you deserve love because of that. And I think the book ultimately will help people who read it overcome that.
One of the reasons why Secret Loves is such a great, important book is because it definitely, you know, it obviously it doesn't have the male gaze in it, because the men are not contributors. Oh, sorry. Sure, what'd I do? Oh, sorry. I'll start over. Well, part of the reason I think that Secret Love of Geek Girls is so important is because it doesn't have the male gaze in it. It's you know, stories by women for women, and in that way, it's really, you know, kind of like a safe space, you know, to explore topics that are, you know, considered off limits in a lot of places.
I really want this book to kind of just blast through all of those stereotypes about geek girls and all the stereotypes about nerd girls out there, because like I said earlier in the interview, I think, especially when you're a teenager and when you're in college, you are just overloaded with all this media telling you you have to change in order to be acceptable to a partner, whether it's losing weight, hiding the fact that you're a Whovian, or just completely putting away your comic books and you have to be the stereotypical housewife and mother in order to be accepted. And I think this book can smash through those and hopefully show these young women that they do not have to give up themselves, not only just to love themselves, but for other people as well. Other people will love them for being themselves.
I'm really hoping with this anthology that girls, women, and even boys and men, just anybody can pick up this book and feel a connection and not feel quite so on the outside or quite so ostracized. And I hope they laugh, they cry, they enjoy it. I hope some stories maybe even make them a little angry. I just want them to be affected ultimately by this book.
There's still a huge amount of taboo and oh, this isn't the way relationships are supposed to be about it. And it's just because I love multiple women doesn't mean that I love any of them differently from the others. I give my entire heart several times over. That's just kind of the thing. So I want to show that there's such a thing as a healthy poly relationship, not just the stereotype of a husband wanting to ask for an open relationship, or friggin' whatever channel Big Love was on that we're not even gonna talk about that. But you have all these issues, especially with trans women. The type of representation we get in mainstream media is so bad. So, people are always make your own, so I made my own. And my friends are making their own, and hopefully we can all inspire others to make their own. And to know that these types of relationships are normal.
I want people to feel happy when they read this book. I think it's very important for people to feel a sense of community and without necessarily having to be in the same place at all. As for a sequel, it depends. It takes a lot of work and energy to run an anthology, to get the right stories together, and to get enough interest out there. So I'd love to do anthologies that focus both on men and people who don't identify as any gender, as well as mixed men and women's stories, because I think there's a tremendous diversity to everyone's love stories, and unfortunately men in particular don't have access to the kind of intimacy and vulnerability that a lot of women do share when they get together. So having a book like that could be something very important to men as well.
Yeah, I would love to have a time machine and give this book to my younger self, because I'm sure she would have really, appreciated it, not feeling like such a weirdo. For many of the themes that are in this book, I completely and deeply relate to. Just as a nerd.